Hi, Gary. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us for Sightglass's first Insight webinar. It's great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
And it's really exciting to get to work with you again. It's been such a blessing to work with you at UKG, get to know you in the San Francisco office. It's rare to meet a data scientist with deep expertise in AI, but also business management. But my favorite job of yours continues to be news anchor. I think that's just fabulous.
That's not even on the LinkedIn profile. It's ancient history and no longer relevant.
That's a shame because you should make that first. How many people get to say they did that? So tell me a bit about yourself and how you kind of came to be, you have such a fascinating and interesting background. How did you end up in machine learning, AI, data science, and combine all of this with your business expertise?
Well, first and foremost, because it's interesting. And I don't think any of us are anchored to a particular job or career path. In fact, I started out as an engineer. I had an FCC first class broadcast engineer's license, and
Wow.
every television station and radio station had to have an engineer on site. And so I had done journalism in the service in the Marine Corps, and they found out about it at the TV station and said, "Go put on a suit. We're moving you to the news department." And I decided that local journalism, even up to fairly large market, wasn't a particularly fulfilling job. There's a lot of politics and accidents, and quite frankly, it's not really journalism.
Yeah.
And so I sort of got pulled into business. And so for any number of years, I was in the business world, first in marketing and operations, and then for the company that did financial technology in international marketing and opening new country markets. And so that was deep into engineering, but also into a lot of really good client-facing opportunities. And also, there was a huge aspect of consulting there because when you're bringing an American company into a country like Korea or Saudi Arabia, or they don't know who you are, what you do, and they don't know that you know their business, and so you really have to get involved in a very consultative relationship. And so then after that company had their IPO and I came back, I ran their shop, set up their shop in Japan and came back to the United States. And after they had their IPO, I had the financial means to start a small consultancy, which I did for a number of years, and really enjoyed it because I could work with businesses and I
Hmm.
could do what Sightglass does, which is not only talk about product, but also get involved in supporting engineering projects and developing, the websites and the back ends, et cetera, et cetera. And one of my clients was building an AI-based application. And so I developed their back end for that and over a period of 3 years. And then they were acquired by Ultimate Software, which eventually merged into UKG, of course. And so I went from 3 years of doing data science engineering for a small company to doing data science and engineering for a very, very large company.
Wow.
And like you said, that's where we met. So
But you really had, and I didn't know this before, you really had an intersection of really early fintech, kind of before it was fintech, really seeing that data modeling in action at the earliest
oh
stage.
yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. We were in a space when IBM basically was the banking platform, and those they had to take them down at the end of the day to do their postings. And so what we did was we did basically they called it stand-in processing. So we handled all the ATM transactions, point of sale transactions, and then in the morning you interleave those with live transactions. And so yeah, it was a time when companies or banks were merging into were basically expanding into 24-hour banking. So it was a and what made it interesting in foreign markets, they weren't sure they needed 24-hour banking. So you had to kind of talk about the industry trends, too, like data science, right? They weren't sure they needed it. Well, actually, folks, you really do need it, and your network actually does have to work with the other
Right.
bank's network. So that was fun, because you really got to sort of bring them along into technology that in the U.S. we were about 5 years ahead of them. So it was a fun job. It's nice to travel around the world on expense account and see new places and
Of course,
meet
of course.
people and make a good living.
And through this data science background, you've really participated in the evolution of this technology over time into things like learning models, into things like the AI space. And so tell me, obviously AI is everywhere right now.
Yeah.
What's the, why is it such a great example today of innovation? And why is AI such a good space to be playing in and investing in your innovation program today?
Well, it actually has been a foundational component of business for probably the last 10 years. It's just that right now, the whole Gen AI chat GTP thing is basically sucked all the oxygen out of the room, and it's got everybody focused. And of course, the press and the companies that sell it are talking about how it's going to change the world. But it's not the only game in town, nor has it been. The machine learning in terms of things like recommendation, like the Netflix recommendation thing, like uh, sentiment analysis, prediction, forecasting. Those have been foundational components of business for 10 years. I mean, basically, they continue to expand as the technology continues to enable them. So it's just that because uh, the whole Gen AI thing is so unique.
Yeah.
It's so new, and here's the key: everybody has access to it.
Hmm.
Everybody all of a sudden is a data scientist because you can put it on your iPhone.
Right.
Um, so it's really changed the world, and I think one of the benefits of it is it brings focus back to using AI, machine learning, as a tool. Now, whether that's a Gen AI model or it's a classification model. Is it a sentiment analysis model? A natural language processing? Is it simple statistics, which often does the job? It brings focus. It brings executive focus and funding and marketing's attention back to those features.
So given that, this space has really emerged in a key way, very different from other forms of AI because it kind of started almost as a very accessible, nearly open source type of approach, right? But that's a very different starting point from how we've seen other versions and areas within AI grow. So, what are some of the pitfalls of this approach in the Gen AI space? What should people be looking out for as they experiment with Gen AI?
Um, that's a really good question because the hype cycle was all about how it's going to change the world.
Yeah.
And if you've been following the news, and maybe I follow it more closely than most folks, a lot of it now is, whoa, slow down. There are issues here. It's moving so fast that there are issues that we need to pay attention to that haven't necessarily been resolved yet. Security issues, legal issues, security issues in particular. I mean, the pace of change, the pace of implementation is, I'm concerned about it outstripping what security has to do to make it work. And this is security not only at the company level, but also at the developers level, at the Meta level, at the OpenAI level. And so, people really, really need to pay attention to that. And I think here's one of the key issues. Who's the user? Who's the consumer of this technology? It has tremendous potential to make changes, very positive changes, impactful changes in an organization. And I would argue that the first focus, which is still can be very, very productive, is focus on internal users. You have better control over security. You have better control over data.
Hmm.
Um, and if you're asking this AI, this chatbot, to produce information or guidance, you can train your people, you can train your staff to understand it's not always perfect. You know, read this document before you send it, check it for accuracy. So you can train your employees to use this, really contribute to productivity, really have a positive impact on the bottom line. You can't change external users.
Right.
I can't have training for everybody's going to interact with my chatbot over the internet, right? So I think that's the first thing. That gives us an opportunity to become comfortable with the technology, to do implementations, to control costs, to control risk, and we can still extract great value. And
Yeah.
there's a there's a point at which we become comfortable enough with it, and the security and the legal aspects of it are more clarified, that we can start rolling it out into into the general public. Chatbots are one of my favorite examples. If I'm a user of a chatbot and I'm interacting with the company's chatbot, I'm perceiving that as fact for the most part. It's telling me something. I'm perceiving it as fact. Well, these models are by very nature deterministic.
Mm-hmm.
So at best, it's a very good guess. Might be 85%, 90% guess. But what about that 10%?
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that you use internally. You can extract a lot of value, get a really positive impact on the bottom line internally, and sort of tiptoe into the external deployment of these models. So
I really like that, Gary. Like maybe said a slightly different way. It's kind of get your training wheels by starting the experimentation in-house, support bottom line revenue as you get better, as you get more experience, as you learn some of these things by doing, then start to experiment outside, looking at top line revenue opportunities with AI as
absolutely,
overall.
absolutely. Learn from what your competitors are doing wrong, or
Yeah.
just pay attention, read the news. I mean, subscribe to some of the outlets that are covering this on a daily basis,
Yeah.
and and engage the people who bring professional knowledge at a deeper level to these projects. You need to be sure your legal department is paying attention, or outside counsel. You have to, right? Or lawyer up, because it could get pretty scary. You need to be sure your security people are on top of this. Because there are known flaws in these models, and they're being addressed, and they're being acknowledged. But the security people, particularly with the Gen AI, the security people need to be involved because they know where the problems lie. Case in point is, let's say I'm using a Gen AI, and that model goes out to the internet and
Mm-hmm.
extracts some information from the internet. What's in that information may actually be harmful. It could be hidden. And what I've gotten from this website, there could be an attack component to the information I've just extracted. Security knows about this, right? It's a really, really fast moving target, but at least security knows that these issues exist. And so they really need to be, well, they're going to get involved eventually. They're going to get involved at the beginning when you're planning, or they're going to get involved when something breaks, or they're going to get involved in an audit, which could really throw sand in the gears.
So I really like you touching on that because I think security and legal are two areas that, honestly, stereotypically, when you think about doing innovation in-house at a software technology company, security and legal are certainly not afterthoughts, but you would call them later on in your experimentation phase or when you're ready to go to market. And they have a stereotypical reputation of, wow, you want to slow things down and really end your trials and experiments, call legal.
Yeah.
And you explained great just now how security fits in, but again, I would never have called legal up front when just trying to run concept experiments in-house with an internal audience. So talk to me a bit about why legal should participate further forward when experimenting in the AI space.
Well, I think legal gets involved more when you're looking about deployment to an outside user.
Okay.
Although there are edge cases. For instance, if I'm using something, there's something called Copilot, and there's a couple of others of these applications that help engineers and developers write software. Um, you know, a good example is Microsoft's GitHub Copilot. They charge you for that.
Mm-hmm.
The the source of that code that they're delivering to you may have been from open source projects where the license agreement says you can't charge for this. So now Microsoft GitHub are having to defend that
Mm-hmm.
because they're monetizing something that's supposed to be free.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if I'm experimenting with Copilot, for instance, to help me write software, it's very good at that, by the way. It's an amazing productivity tool. But what people may not realize is that if I'm doing experimentation on my own with my private repository, right in the user agreement, GitHub Copilot gets to use my code. They get to consume my code. And
Hmm.
so that's fine as long as we're aware of it. And that's one of the reasons that legal and security can bring something to the table very early on to sort of set up these guardrails. But I'd like to focus on the positive. If our objective is getting something done, if our objective is actually reaching the point where we're having a positive impact on the bottom line, then I think they bring things to the table. They might bring ideas to the table. You're not going to have any shortage of ideas because everybody's paying attention to this space right now. So let's say I talked about an AI governance team, and I use the word team because I hate the word committee, and they're not really. They're a team, and their objective is to get things done,
Yeah.
right? To make it go faster. And sometimes, the old story. You could sometimes. What's the fisherman's thing? Going fast is going slow. Tie
Yeah.
a knot with her, you're going to tie a knot 5 times, right? Tie a knot deliberately, and you're going to get the knot tied. So going fast is going slow, and I think that's a really good sort of foundational theory with these projects is get these people involved. They're going to be involved, right? But the problem today is they get involved at different points of the project.
Hmm.
I get done, and all of a sudden engineering says, "Well, yeah, but you need to do this," and then we get that done, and all of a sudden security says, "Yeah, but you can't do that," and then we
Right.
get down the line, and data says, "Well," the data say, "Well, you have the data for your experiment, but the data you need for deployment is not available." And so, if these people get involved at various stages of the project, you have multiple opportunities to stop it dead in its tracks after you spend a lot of money, right? And so if you get them involved early on, it works both ways. They bring knowledge to the table to get this done right. And they may bring ideas to say, oh, because everybody's got access to this world now. They might say, hey, how about if we do this? And so you're always going to have a surplus of ideas. And the nice thing about this kind of team is they can help you focus on the ideas that are going to have a positive impact on the bottom line, the lowest risk, highest reward approach. And like I say, there's plenty of opportunities out there. Some of them are, and a lot of them are internal. A lot of them, you can be low risk, a high benefit, and again, become comfortable with the technology and what you can do with it.
Well, and like you said, I like the examples you used just now because you're not always experimenting with AI directly with your offering. You could be doing it indirectly through using something like Copilot and GitHub. And that could be a really effective way to dip your toe into low code prototyping. How do I get to concept faster? How do I use generally lower risk,
Yep,
lower importance things that I don't need someone spending 40 hours a week on? I think that's
exactly.
an interesting opportunity.
Yep.
Something that's been bugging me about the space with my own educational background in human factors and design is, Gary, as you know, AI in general, whether it's an indirect effect or directly part of your value proposition, is going to have to solve a real problem if it's ever going to generate real innovation and result in top line revenue opportunities and new paths to growth. It's got to solve real problems
Yes.
for humans.
Yes.
So you've talked about, security, legal, ethics, diversity, equity, inclusion, all having a seat at the Gen AI leadership space.
Yeah.
What do the rest of and tell me a high level, components about the rest of that leadership group around AI in your business? And
Well,
really the governance space is what
right.
I'm talking about here, Gary.
Well, and I mentioned this earlier. I alluded to it, that there are a number of players
Yeah,
in this space that get involved from ideation all the way to deployment, and they're going to get involved at some point, right? Legal is going to get involved at some point. Security is absolutely going to get involved at some point, and security bears, a special attention because I don't think even the CEO in most corporations can overrule security. So let's get them involved early. But looking at who are the players, um, clearly product is kind of the center of this team, right? Because they're the conduit a lot of times for ideas from leadership,
yeah.
and they also then own, they own the roadmap. So product is really the central player in all of this, and they're hopefully capable of sort of navigating and managing this team. Data science, obviously. I've actually seen situations where, believe it or not, the data science team were involved until the projects were on the roadmap. Like,
Wow.
okay, here, go do this, guys. Wait, this doesn't really make any sense. We'll do it anyway. Um, engineering, I have seen this happen again and again where engineering was brought in after the project had been funded, and the model is really, it's not insignificant, but it's a small part of the overall effort involved in taking this from ideation to deployment. You have to deal with the data, and data requires a lot of work. In many cases, it's siloed. You might need data from different parts of the organization. You might need external data. You might need to use the customer's data and negotiate that in the contract, et cetera, et cetera. And then, the training and validating the model is one thing, but then you've got to deploy it. And that's a whole nother process where engineering will know how to do that, but the data science team might not have any real understanding of what's involved. And then the process of deploying it and maintaining it and monitoring it, that's also very important, and it's potentially expensive. So a lot of these, they address viability from the perspective of deploying and maintaining it, but they also obviously have an impact on the bottom line. So if you have these people collaborating from very early in this stage, I would say after ideation, and this is a really cool idea, and marketing likes it, and product likes it. Okay, let's take a deeper look at it before we fund a prototype, before we fund a minimal viable product. I think that's you're gonna win, right? The objective of this group is not to throw sand in the gears. The objective of this group is to make it successful and to get the proper players involved early enough so that they all have input and nobody comes to the table late in the game and breaks it, and stops it dead in its tracks or adds all sorts of unanticipated costs to it. But the other thing that I like is we shouldn't consider these people as gatekeepers. We shouldn't consider this team as gatekeepers because uh, AI has very much been democratized. Everybody can fiddle with it now. And so they can bring ideas to the team and say, hey, maybe this might really work, or let's take a look at this. Finance might come with some really interesting ideas that the data science people, product people never even thought of. And let's face it, bottom line is bottom line, right? And so, I like to look at a product or a project, excuse me, to say, okay, um, is this going to increase market share and have a positive impact on the bottom line? Is this going to defend market share and provide shrinkage and have a positive impact on the bottom line? Is this project going to improve productivity internally, make things work better, make things work smoother, and have a positive impact on the bottom line? And I think when you have this group involved in the opportunity to knock around these ideas and talk about the impact on their various fields, I think that's a huge positive. And I think you're going to waste a lot less money, have a lot more success in projects. And, the proof is in how many projects fail. But if I think I've read as few as 1 in 10 data science projects ever makes it into deployment. And they're expensive. It's an expensive failure.
Yeah.
Gary's preaching. I apologize.
Well, and so, but your points make sense though. So taking that kind of conceptual approach not only lessens your investment and more experimental directive, you're learning faster. You're learning to cut off expensive paths you might have otherwise gone down. And I like, your points too around some of the things you're talking about, Gary, when experimenting and building, maybe even no code concepts to trial some of these aspects out before you get into writing different components of AI trials for your business. But these just sound like good software development process improvements you should make. Government as enablement, not as gatekeeping. Bringing other components into the ideation process. It's not just design in a white tower. It's not just something an executive came up with and shot down the pipe. These are really important elements to continuous discovery, to finding paths to innovation that can involve lots of different groups, like customer support, who talks to customers all day.
Absolutely. And there's, for instance, you brought up an opportunity for using AI internally. Let's say I have these customer support files, so these reports, these requests come in. I can summarize them. I can apply AI to that to summarize them, and I can look at them and actually probably develop an application that points that shunts them off to the right people to respond.
Yeah.
How critical is this? How angry are they? What aspect of our operation does it affect? Who gets this? Who needs to look at it? Who can scan these? I could give you a summary as a manager. You can work with that a lot more efficiently than if I give you, a stack of reports. So there again, it's low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And I think people have identified this, right, as low hanging fruit. But again, it's an application that's not very sexy. Marketing won't be very excited about it, but accounting certainly will. Finance will be.
Right.
If I can save an hour a day from the staff of 500 people, then that's just that drops right to the bottom line.
Yeah. What an effective tool to drive back into your market and user experience research program too, huh?
No question about it.
Sped up months of research time.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, this was wonderful. I really appreciate your time today, and it's always a pleasure to work with you and be around you. We had such a great time in the San Francisco office way back when. It's always
We
nice.
did. We did. I love it here. Silicon Valley is a fun place. You can't go have a beer without bumping into somebody that has something really interesting to talk about. So yeah, it's
That's
a great
right.
place.
Well, thanks, Gary. Have a great afternoon, and we'll chat later.
Thanks, John. Take care.